Varun for president. So the original title is actually from when Paul Graham announced Sam Altman to be president at YC. So
some big shoes there.
Yeah, some big shoes to fill. I expect you on a OpenAI like Prime Minister tour in 10 years from now. So thanks for everybody for joining us. Kind of uncommon. This is a series of videos now that we had with some of the leads. What's the purpose of this, Peter?
Yeah, so I think we're going to cover a few different areas. We're going to talk about the automotive industry and how it's changing. We're going to talk about the other verticals that we've expanded into and our work in those verticals, and then also broadly AI and how that's really changing the landscape of vehicle engineering. But maybe before we dive into those, maybe Qasar, do you want to talk about what is president for Applied Intuition?
It roughly means kind of the most senior person in the company outside of, us as being the founders. So I think it's important as the company scaled over the years that we start, we just had the video with Brian, our CFO. It's like, this is the leadership team. We have north of 100 managers in the company. So there already is a quite mature team, but, I think as we become just more outward facing. It's a good way to introduce folks. And also, frankly speaking, this video is more for our customers than anything else, who Varun and us two, we constantly interact with. So it's a good kind of introduction to the role, and it's kind of one of the most latest topics that are on everybody's mind. So that being said, as Peter said, first we want to cover automotive, but before we do that, all the customers know you, but what your background? So who are you?
Yeah, so first of all, I've been with the company from the living house from Anaheim. So it's been a lot of fun to see from that living room, which was much smaller even than this room, to where we are at today. My background originally, I did my PhD at Stanford in the similar. Originally from India. Yeah. So actually grew up there. And then after that, I've been outside India for many years. I actually did my high school in Singapore, then undergrad in the cold Midwest, and then moved over to the Bay Area.
The Singapore education system, there's lots of Indians there, right? And lots of Chinese, and it's a great, I've heard very positive things about it.
Yeah, I was lucky actually to be one of the few people they picked from India to go on a scholarship and put us in a normal local Singapore school. That was quite a fun experience.
Yeah. So then you do undergrad at
UIUC.
Yeah.
And then I came to Stanford for my PhD. Yeah. And I always wanted to work on real things, but also on the CS physics side of it. That's why I ended up choosing simulation as my PhD topic.
So for all the folks who have not done a PhD, I know a lot of our company has, so I'm sorry to bore people, but for the folks who haven't, how do you make that decision near the matriculation of your PhD if you're going to go into academics, or, you're going to continue through a postdoc or go to industry because you chose industry?
So when I signed up for my PhD at Stanford, I did not know if I'm going to go into academia or not.
Okay.
I thought academia could be interesting, but I was always inclined to a little bit shorter term mindset of actually getting something in front of products and customers. So I started that journey even during my PhD. And that's when I said, hey, Stanford's a great schoul, which actually encourages you to go and do startups.
Yeah.
They almost shame you if you're finishing your PhD. They're like, what are you doing? So I ended up picking, actually, that was one of the big reasons I ended up picking Stanford. And within my first year or so, it was clear to me I didn't want to do academia and I wanted to do industry.
Yeah, so Harvard Business School I imagine when you're applying for the PhD, do they ask you, do you want to be academic or not?
They don't. They ask you for essays where the right answer is you want to be the professor, but they also are hoping that you.
So HBS has questions as essays. And the answer is always, I want to make money. So
and I was lucky to have a choice between Stanford and MIT.
Yeah.
And just going on site, you could see which school will actually push you to do startups. And that was actually Stanford.
Yeah, that's true. It's super fast. I mean, that's one of the heavily reported things, but Stanford plays just a lot of roles in startups. But you didn't go into startups afterwards. Sorry, we're going on this tangent of your background for so long, but you spent a bunch of years in automotive before coming to Applied.
Yeah, so I was working on really deep tech, hard tech. In my research group that I was in, it was a lot of people going into academia and then some people going into large companies such as Bosch.
Yeah.
So for me, that was a more natural way to enter that ecosystem.
Was the AI boom happening at that point or no?
Funny enough, I mean, there was a version of AI boom already happening at that point. I would really call it like AI 1.0. Now, today we are in 2.0 land. In my PhD, I was working on using ANNs, as you were calling it, artificial neural networks, to model physical phenomena. But frankly, the compute wasn't there. I was running on some of the largest computers the government had at that point, but it was only 100,000 nodes.
I think the biggest computers back then were probably maybe a single NVIDIA rack today equivalent.
Yeah, I mean, we were talking about exascale computing and exascale computing being real in like 10 years. I mean, that number was hit within 5 years.
Yeah.
So yeah, I saw that. But I mean, big reason for me was I wanted to learn how do big companies develop. What are the things they do well? What are the things they don't do well? So joining Bosch.
And you were doing R&D at Bosch.
Yes. So I joined actually in the corporate research department of Bosch, which was their kind of smaller startup environment working on cutting edge things. Learned a lot there about how to kick off new projects. My teams were some of the first ones working with Tesla actually back in the day.
Yeah.
Trying to convince them to work, actually convincing Bosch to work with Tesla. So I learned a lot about that startup type environment, 0 to 1, but in a larger company. And I kept going smaller and smaller.
That was back when Tesla was so small, Bosch wouldn't take Tesla seriously. Is that right?
Yeah, I mean, it's challenging, right? If you are talking about a car company almost 15 years ago in the Bay Area.
Classic mistake I think mature companies make is they look at the y-axis and not look at rate of change.
Yeah.
And the main thing you have to look at is rate of change. No matter how small the company is, if the rate of change is, significant, it will pass any, mature company. And I think that like level of fear sometimes isn't there. When you think about competitors coming out.
Especially when you're working on really deep tech, that rate of change can be very fast. It can be much faster than what you expect.
Yeah, there's a little bit of shortcuts that happen, like some technical innovation. And then you were at Aptiv working on autonomy as well.
Yeah, so at Aptiv, I got to work on both the production side of ADAS, but also I would really call it the advanced engineering portion, where we were trying to deploy a robotaxi service in Vegas, which eventually became a company called Motional. So really got to see both sides of autonomy, the assistance side, so the ADAS side, and then also full autonomy.
So then you've been at Applied for the 8+ years now, from basically the whole history of the company. Maybe before we dive into the individual verticals, what's been the biggest surprise? This is your first startup. I remember, for the folks at home, I clearly remember the first time we met.
The Phil's Coffee.
Yeah, Phil's Coffee. I know the desk. I know where I was sitting, or Peter was sitting, and because just all the early employees have such a huge impact on the company, and I, almost like to a hard to imagine level, because they create the culture and all of that stuff. What's been your impression from the house all the way to like this campus that we have now? Yeah.
I mean, so every time people talk about the fact that we are like a startup within a large company, they don't quite know what they're talking about. It's very different to actually be in the living room where everything you're doing is going to make or break the company on a daily basis.
Yeah, you have a finite amount of capital, and you have to turn it around and make something.
Yeah, so I think that experience has been very, very unique, and I've really enjoyed that. I think that still holds true in some cases even today.
Yeah.
As we are going into newer areas, as we are working on newer technology areas, we need to keep that mindset of, hey, the default is nothing happens unless we can go and have the right technical approach and execute against that.
Yeah, that's my fear as the company is growing, is like that sharp paranoia that we've, has been a core part of the company, like essentially becomes smoothed out. But the thing about, being in a big company and being a startup, we used to make this a joke at Google, which was like, a PM at Google is like just being like a founder, except the risk or the reward. It's like nothing like being in a startup. But what are your biggest surprises?
Yeah, I mean, the other thing which was a huge surprise for me is just this radical pragmatism part that comes in on a day-to-day basis. So I think people have this kind of fascination with, startup, you go sit together, you are geniuses, you come up with this idea, and then out comes all the revenue in the market. I think throughout the journey, all the decisions we made, which products to go after, which customers to engage with, which contracts to take, those individual decisions over the long arc of the company have played out to our success today.
What's your recommendation for the Bosches? Maybe not the Bosches, the Aptiv, more the OEMs, because they're more of our customers within that context of, radical pragmatism.
I mean, you have to be very careful to know what is the end product that you're going to be selling to your consumers, and then making sure you're backing out all of your decisions with that target in mind. I think too often OEMs or large companies get too caught up in, is this strategic for us or not? Should we go invest in this for the next 10 years? Hey, if the product doesn't ship today, none of that will matter.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like we see that across verticals where like the bigger conversation is always like, well, should we build in-house or we should buy and all, like it's like spending 18 months on that decision. And it's like, if you had just decided to buy, you would be pushing to SOP right now. And it's like, you start a production.
Yeah.
And it's kind of shocking because then that earns you the right, because you're at the front of the pack to recruit better people and like the flywheel starts working.
I think these decisions also, it's always within the context of a particular industry and, period of time, right?
And
the product. So where we are at today, these are very technical products. They're becoming even more technical with the software that's going in there. The industry is changing. There are other competitors who are going and making these changes much faster than what was imagined in these industries.
Yeah.
So you have to act accordingly.
What do you guys think, as this is published, the Tesla robotaxi, not cybercab, robotaxi system is out. What do you guys think? How do you think that's going to impact our customers and just the industry as a whole?
Yeah, so having come from the more traditional automotive safety critical landscape, the first instinct for everybody is, so what if they did 10 cars or maybe 20 cars? I think that's the incorrect way of looking at it. Really, the industry, the technology is changing. Tesla is a large enough company that can shape the perspective of what is safe or not. So I do think you have to take it very seriously, take the learnings from it, and actually put that into product.
What do you think?
Yeah, I think the big challenge, of course, is having the right safety guarantees on the different AI systems. And so you have these different approaches being used throughout the industry. Tesla talks about more of an end-to-end approach. There's also these multi-stage approaches.
End-to-end star mark is a little bit of marketing speak. Yeah.
You can say modular end-to-end. Yeah, different ways of talking.
2-stage versus 1-stage, right? I think people just market it all together.
Yeah, but like regardless of the approach, it needs to be very safe. And I think, as best we can tell, Waymo has been extremely careful.
I mean, what's kind of shocking is how long Waymo's been on roads and there's never been an accident, like in a real way.
I think not that was their fault.
Yeah. It isn't like a Waymo-induced significant critical problem.
Yeah. So, the statistics will play out here, but we'll sort of see, I think, in the coming weeks, how safe or unsafe is the Tesla system. And we're not in a position to judge, but just looking at the technical approaches, we think the risk level that they're taking is probably higher than Waymo would take.
We are in this interesting, balance even as a company, right? Our first value is move fast, move safe.
Yeah.
So if you end up with the move safe part and you spend maybe 15 years building this, maybe the market and tech has completely moved on.
Yeah.
But if you do the move fast and if you have an incident, there's multiple companies, whether that's Uber, whether that's Cruise, that had single big incidents really tank their programs.
Maybe here's a question. Given what's happening in the industry right now, how much do you think this technology will or won't commoditize, specifically autonomy in consumer vehicles?
Yeah, so my view is that just a standalone autonomy, provider, it's going to get more and more quote unquote commoditized over time. I think this tech will get more and more integrated with the rest of the vehicle.
You can see that happening in China.
But I think the technical advancements that are happening, it's a very exciting time right now with all of the model quantization work happening. How do you validate these models? What is the backup pathway? How does a parking system work? Like, those are really interesting problems that are being looked at today.
Yeah, interesting. Going outside of automotive, sometimes people say we're a dual-use company. Probably we're multi-use. We're in a bunch of different verticals. Maybe we should trademark that term. Let's get the marketing guys on it. How do you see, you've worked now with our mining customers and our trucking customers and our defense customers.
Yeah.
How is it similar or different? And I think, again, if you're one of those folks who, at home who are watching this, what's your takeaway from whether it's a cybercab / robotaxi stuff or Waymo stuff?
Yeah, so that's the interesting part with software. All of these trends that we're seeing in one industry, they directly apply to the other industry. It's only a question of timeline. So what I mean by that is the trends that we see in automotive, trucks is maybe lagging it by a year and a half, max couple of years. And then defense is actually now almost catching up with automotive because the adversaries are using the exact same tech, right?
Yeah.
So the technical approaches are very similar. I do think all these industries are in different levels of kind of realization of where they're at and what is their competition. And that's where we are actually unique to be able to provide that perspective to them.
Yeah. Interesting. And that's all on the autonomy side, vehicle intelligence, broader kind of category than that, and the kind of area we play in. Thoughts on in-cabin experience and just broadly the tooling that we built?
Yeah, I think we are very early days in terms of the in-cabin experience. Even if you look at the leading car companies that are deploying this in China, the experience is actually very, very similar to what you have in your car. It's well done, it works, but it's still fundamentally a very similar experience. I think with the latest AI techniques available, how you interact with the car, how you interact with the cabin will just look very different. You're not pressing all of those buttons necessarily. The agent really knows everything that you're doing. It's connected to your rest of your digital ecosystem. I think that's going to look very different. And not just in automotive, but in all the other verticals. We had this experience with the army, vehicles where the soldiers took some of the vehicle intelligence from us and used it differently in the field. We're seeing the same in trucks, construction, and mining. So the whole industry is going to change pretty dramatically.
And so on AI, how are you thinking about how this trend will change the types of products that we Applied produce?
Yeah, I mean, so the products inherently will become way more connected. So how you interact with this AI agent on your phone, on a portal in the vehicle, will have to be seamless. You cannot have 3 different agents that are running. Also, what is the offline use case when you're not connected versus the online use case when you can leverage the cloud? That I think is going to become interesting. So for us as a company, these products will really become kind of AI products across the full ecosystem without worrying about, is it on car, in an app, in the cloud? It's one AI everywhere.
And of course, most of our customers, they have huge engineering teams that are using our products. So how do you think about this on the engineering side?
Yeah, I mean, so we are starting to see that already for many of our customers that had traditional mechanical engineers who were trying to learn how to develop software, C++ code and so on. With the latest AI techniques, which we are putting in a lot of our products as well, you can basically have mechanical engineers trained with these AI tools to write really high quality software. So I think the developer productivity, how you validate these systems, how you deploy them is going to change fundamentally with some of the AI techniques. And we are seeing that with our engineering teams already.
This vehicle intelligence category, I think it's a rich and vibrant category. What do you think are the biggest hurdles that this space is going to face over the next 5 to 10 years, especially from the customer's perspective?
So I think one of the biggest challenges, our customers are still discovering how to use these techniques. So if you are a product lead at one of the car companies or a mining company, I think it's tough for them to even imagine how to use this AI for the end consumer. So defining the product, I think, will be one of the big challenges. And that's where when we are working with our customers and partners, we are trying to help them imagine that. The other challenge I see is going to be around safety. And I don't mean safety of the autonomy system. I just mean safety in terms of how do you protect the data? How do you make sure what's personal for one person versus a combined model across the whole a car company or a truck company? I think those challenges are going to be very, very big.
Yeah, I think one of the interesting things that I think we've experienced here in the last few years is some of our customers will say things like, well, we supply to everybody in the ecosystem, right? So we're a technology supplier like Qualcomm or NVIDIA would supply their chips to everybody. We provide these products and tools. And they say, well, if you're working with X, can you really work with us? And for that reason, we're going to maybe try to forge our own path. And I really wonder, that's probably the wrong thing to do. You basically want to take the best technology that exists. But what's your view in a situation like that where you have multiple trucking companies or multiple car companies or multiple, primes that are using our tools and they're competing against each other? I mean, are they now creating commodity goods?
So the investments needed to do the AI techniques, especially the next generation ones, those are going up pretty dramatically. There's not a single...
you can't afford it.
You can't afford it. I mean, it's just impossible to compete with large consumer companies or GPU companies which are investing hundreds of millions of dollars, right? And they're talking about billions of dollars on data center and electricity. So with that reality, you can either choose to do your completely custom in-house AI, which will protect the data and it'll protect your quote-unquote strategic advantage, but it's just not going to be as good of a model, right? So what we are
If
providing...
you have the engineers and you have the leadership to actually do it.
I mean, just even if you can hire those people, which by the way, it's very challenging, just the raw infrastructure costs and the time to set it up is is long, and companies don't have the expertise to do it, right? So our approach very much has been, let's leverage the best that's out there. With the latest techniques, you can have foundation models, you can have these starting points with very good commercial models associated with it. And then let's focus on the fine tuning and the differentiation. So, and then as a partner for us, you can still have that final application that is completely custom to you, that differentiates one vehicle versus the other, but you don't need to do the heavy lifting of building everything up from scratch.
Yeah. I mean, the example that I think always comes to my mind is if if you're building a factory for cars, are you going to make your own, custom air drill and conveyor belt and each robot? You're not. But what comes out of the factory is vastly different for companies using the exact same tools.
Yeah.
And so I think the real edge is me as a customer, from my use case, am I picking the right things to work on, et cetera? And that's where we can work together. In terms of kind of just wrapping up on AI, what do you think are the next couple of years within our industry that we should be really hyper-focused on? I think autonomy and in-cabin is some of that stuff. Developer productivity is another one. What else would you recommend to customers to think about?
Yeah, so I think the whole logistic chain of how data is handled in factories, how is software upgrade managed, how do you do diagnosis in all of the vehicles that are out there? How do you do the dealer experience? Basically, any place where you have software that's touching your product today,
impacted by AI,
it's going to be changed completely.
Yeah.
And I mean, just as an example, how quickly can you create a web app, right? I mean, people used to pay companies tens of millions of dollars to create one application for one particular area.
And now high school kids do it. Yeah.
That can be done by high school kids, or it can be done by your team, which wasn't even trained up on software development.
Yeah.
Right? So I think it will change almost everything across the company, and any place which touches software, which is almost everything, is impacted by AI.
The last area I want to talk about is something that's near and dear to all of our hearts, which is all of us being automotive refugees into Silicon Valley. There's, I am sure, a large portion of the listening audience is automotive engineers who live in places where we grew up in Michigan or, in the Midwest, or in India, we just, or Munich or Tokyo or Seoul. Advice to move into AI. This really goes to both of you guys, because I think if you come from the classic vehicle development universe, you're going to be technical. I always say, understanding thermodynamics is actually way more difficult than understanding model optimization, because you have to know math on thermo, and it's not something you can, do a quick route on.
Yeah.
Maybe you can in AI either, but what would be your recommendations if you're making that career? Because we've all made that career over the last 15, 20 years.
And I think it's similar in defense and other areas too. But
I would say, interestingly, whether we're talking about Gemini or ChatGPT or any of these services, I think actually education is one of the top use cases. And so for any of these topics, I mean, even this question, you could type in and get pretty tailored advice for this situation.
So I'm a retired fighter jet. We have an uncanny amount of ex-fighter jet pilots in Applied. I think we might have
ex-CTOs as well.
We have over 40 ex-CTOs.
So ask ChatGPT.
Yeah. So
I would say understanding some of the foundational elements of the technology is very important. And so there's a handful of research papers that I think are just important to understand at some level. Because once you understand that, everything sort of starts to really make sense how this stuff actually works.
Yeah, it's like if you're a mechanical engineer, you have to know physics. Yeah. You don't know physics, it's going to be really hard to talk about anything else.
Yeah. Once you understand those fundamentals, then I think it's really more a matter of learning how to use the tools. And there's so many amazing tools. I mean, at Applied, we are working on a bunch of amazing tools in this space.
Yeah.
But there are so many tools in the market.
Yeah. So from an engineering perspective, mechanical engineers and other engineers, you learn so much math. It's actually fascinating to look at the stochastic gradient methods and all the methods that are used in AI. Those are taught in almost all engineering programs.
Yeah.
So that's something which you can pick up much more instinctively than actually even many of the AI practitioners. And that helps you to understand the technology, as Peter was saying. But then along with that, I would really say, try it, use it. You have the lower entry barrier now. You don't need to worry about C++ syntax anymore or how to write compilers.
Assembly
Or Fortran F90, as we were doing initially. So you can really focus on the application, and you can use your unique perspective of knowing both the domain, also the physics, also how these technologies are used, and you can have pretty outsized impact.
Yeah, I mean, my 2 cents is use your insecurity to your advantage. I mean, it's like you might not have actually gone to a place like Stanford or something like that, but I think there's so much online, and I mean, my hot take is, I don't think it's as difficult as people make it to be. I mean, the industry is one you can enter, and I think where our customers struggle, if you're out in Tokyo or you're out in Seoul is you actually don't have the community that you have in Silicon Valley.
Yeah.
In Silicon Valley, even if you learn something, it's always nice to have other people who are doing it, and then that becomes like an area of interest that you talk about, and that's the drinks and
I think also the industry changes so quickly. If you're not in the right ecosystem, you won't realize it.
You're always 6 months behind.
Yeah. So I mean, just as an example, even for me, 8 years ago, when I could see some of this coming up, there's all these Udacity courses and other courses on like how to train a model. I mean, today, you don't need to spend any time on any of that, right?
Yeah.
All of that basic infrastructure is already in place. So the entry barrier lowers so much, but I think people don't realize how quickly you can use these technologies today.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, it's been a great many years working together. I'm sure it'll be many, many years going forward. And congrats on the new role. And as we always say at Applied, when we make people managers, congrats and condolences.
No, thank you guys. It's been a fantastic journey, and I'm looking forward to how we deploy this vehicle intelligence all over the globe, across all the verticals. So we are still early in our journey. I'm excited for the part.
Yeah, people say that in a cliche way. Every startup says we're early in our journey. We are, in the sense of 1% of the autonomy has been unlocked, maybe less than that, and certainly in the larger vehicle intelligence university, much even smaller than that. But thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.